So a couple of years ago, I started to notice a trend online. Some stranger would be posting abusive messages on my Twitter feed, you know, as usual. And I'd look at the account and it would be a librarian, right? And this wasn't a one-off. I started getting loads of abuse from librarians. It was like, it's something out of the Twilight Zone. It was really weird. Now, I am used to this kind of thing from the kind of accounts with, like, anime avatars and pronouns in the bio. You know, the sort of people who like to harass people online and send them death threats in the name of compassion. But the concept of a librarian activist was kind of weird to me, so I looked into it a bit more. So it would seem that, for whatever reason, libraries attract a particularly aggressive type of social justice ideologue. Now, I must preface this by saying I am not talking about all librarians, right? Some of my best friends are librarians, right? Don't have an issue with it. But there is a vocal minority who aren't really librarians at all. They're activists. Like, even the British Library, the top library in the country, has been captured by this ideology of critical social justice. It has what they call a decolonising working group, which has successfully persuaded its management to review its collections, powerfully interpret statues of its founders, and put more than 300 authors on a watch list if they have even the flimsiest of connections to the slave trade. One of the group's more bizarre findings is that the library's main building is a monument to imperialism because it looks a bit like a battleship. I'm really not making this up. And this week it was reported that archivists at Homerton College in Cambridge were engaged in a project to upload their collection of children's literature to the internet, but they've decided to apply trigger warnings to books that might cause offence due to outdated racial stereotypes. These include Little House on the Prairie, The Water Babies, and various books by Dr. Seuss. By the way, this project is being paid for by an £80,000 grant from the Arts and Humanities Research Board, funded fully by the taxpayer. I probably should have given you a trigger warning before saying that. If you're going to start putting warnings on children's books, where will that stop? Are we going to get a note on page 1 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland saying, "Warning, depicts graphic scenes of cake theft and walrus depression"? And what about Watership Down? I mean, come on. Watership Down, the trigger warning on that is going to be longer than the book itself. Well, with all that bunny rabbit genocide going on. You might say, well, we put warnings on films in case children might be watching, right? But that's a guide for parents. I mean, the British Board of Film Classification doesn't make claims that the films themselves are harmful, and that is the key distinction. And here's what the archivists at Cambridge have said in an official statement. They want to make their digital collection, quote, less harmful in the context of a canonical literary heritage that is shaped by and continues a history of oppression. It's Little House on the Prairie, right? This is like accusing the Flumps of being Nazi propaganda. Books aren't harmful, right? Unless you're talking about paper cuts. They're just not. I mean, I suppose some of the Stephen King novels are quite hefty. I mean, you could do a bit of damage with that. But on the whole, books are pretty safe. But most revealing of all, right, the archivists at Cambridge said the following. They said, it would be a dereliction of our duty as gatekeepers to allow such casual racism to go unchecked. But librarians aren't gatekeepers, they're custodians. They're meant to facilitate access, not prevent people from reading nasty words. If I need protection, I'm going to hire myself a security guard, preferably an ex-Marine or something, not a librarian. Now, if you really want to understand the culture war, you need to realise that it is largely about language. The disciples of the critical social justice ideology, what some people call wokeness, believe that our understanding of reality is constructed entirely by language, and that if all forms of linguistic expression are a means to exert power over oppressed group. They don't like stable definitions because it means their flimsy ideas can be scrutinised. And it's also why they don't believe in free speech, because they're convinced that if they could just control the words that people say, society would be perfectible. So to give you a recent example, a while back on the show, I reported on Brandeis University's list of oppressive language, right? Some of the examples are words like lame, spirit animal, female-bodied. It's very offensive, that one. They had a separate category of, quote, violent language. Now, violent language included rule of thumb, because apparently it's a belief that this phrase derives from the width of the rod that a man was allowed to beat his wife in English law. That's an urban myth, by the way. That was debunked back in the 1970s, but, you know, who cares about truth when you've got lived experience, right? The university also said that picnic was a violent word, because it apparently has some kind of racist connotations. Maybe during the summer months, the police might start patrolling Hampstead Heath to arrest all those fascists eating their chicken drumsticks and marzipan cupcakes. But it's not just about the words you can't use, It's about the words you must use. So the other day, the journalist Jesse Singal drew attention to this fascinating document by the American Medical Association. It is called Advancing Health Equity, A Guide to Language, Narrative and Concepts. And they provided some examples here of phrases that doctors and other medical staff might use they're well-intentioned, but these people think they're actually oppressive, and they suggest some alternatives. So let's have a look at this. So for an example, instead of the phrase, Native Americans have the highest mortality rates in the United States, you should say, dispossessed by the government of their land and culture, Native Americans have the highest mortality rates in the United States. Instead of, low-income people have the highest level of coronary artery disease in the United States, doctors should be saying, people underpaid and forced into poverty as a result of banking policies, real estate developers gentrifying neighbourhoods, and corporations weakening the power of labour movements, among others, have the highest level of coronary artery disease in the United States. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it? And it's perfectly possible, of course, to inadvertently say something that is offensive. We should be mindful of that. I agree with that. But this isn't really about teaching medical staff to be more sensitive, is it? It's about teaching them to express the approved opinions. And there are plenty of words being redefined here. So, like, for instance, the phrase able-bodied no longer means someone who doesn't have a disability. It now means a term used to describe someone who does not identify as having a disability. So I may not have any legs, but if I identify as able-bodied, I'm able-bodied. Great, problem solved, right? And predictably, this document includes the fashionable redefinition of homosexuality as same-gender attracted instead of same-sex attracted. This is really common now. And this new definition is not one accepted by the vast majority of gay people. It doesn't matter what they want. This is being imposed from above. And you might say, well, all of this is advisory. No one's going to get fired for not using the suggested language. But increasingly, people are feeling pressurised in the workplace to adopt language and opinions that they simply don't share. And just yesterday, it was revealed that activists at Leeds University have called on their Vice-Chancellor to make it policy for staff to state their preferred pronouns in their email signatures and at the beginning of meetings. But the thing is, to do that is to profess fealty to gender identity ideology, which most people don't believe in. This would be like telling people that at the beginning of every meeting they must declare their faith in Baal, the ancient Canaanite god of fertility. Maybe they should sacrifice a goat or something. Ultimately, we have to make a choice. When ideologues are attempting to coerce us into using the words that they prefer and express the opinions that they support, do we just go along with that for an easy life? I mean, it's tempting, but if you do that, you're only asking for trouble later on. So this is my thought. When someone tells you to announce your pronouns or to articulate a view that you just don't share, say no. Like, these people want everyone else to submit to their worldview. Don't let them get away with it.